From translation, RSV Revised Standard Version, this 151 day of the year, today we are reading passages Esther 6-10, Esther chapter 6, verses 1 to 14. On that night the king could not sleep. And he gave orders to bring the book of memorable deeds, the Chronicles, to be read to the king. And it was found written how Mordecai had told of Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's doorkeepers, who sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And the king said, "What honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" The king's young men who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." The king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows which he had prepared for him. The young men told the king, "Haman is standing in the court." The king said, "Let him come in." So Haman came in, and the king said to him, "What shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor?" Haman thought to himself, "To whom would the king delight to honor more than myself?" Then Haman said to the king, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought which the king himself has worn, and let a horse be saddled on which the king has ridden, and let the royal crest be placed on his head. And let the robes and the horse be delivered to one of the king's most noble princes. Let him array the man whom the king delights to honor, and conduct him on horseback through the open square of the city, proclaiming before him, 'Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.'" Then Haman said to the king, "Let the robes and the horse be given to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate, and let not a hand but be laid on him. And let him array Mordecai and conduct him through the open square of the city, proclaiming before him, 'Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.'" So the king took the robes and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai, and led him through the open square of the city, proclaiming before him, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." And Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered. Haman recounted to Zeresh his wife and all his friends everything that had befallen him. Then his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not prevail against him but will surely fall before him." While they were yet talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. So the king and Haman went to dine with Esther the queen. Esther chapter 7, verses 1-10. On the second day, as they were drinking wine, the king again said to Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." Then Esther said, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me as my petition, and my people as my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold as slaves, I would have held my tongue, though the adversary could never compensate for the king's loss." Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he, who has dared to do this?" Esther said, "A foe and an enemy, this wicked Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. The king rose in his wrath from the feast of wine, and went into the palace garden. But Haman stayed to beg his life from the Queen Esther, for he saw that harm was determined against him by the king. The king returned from the palace garden to the place where the banquet was being held, and Haman was lying prostrate on the couch where Esther was. And the king said, "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" As the king spoke, the men covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, "And the gallows which Haman has prepared for Mordecai, who spoke good for the king, is standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high." And the king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the gallows which he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the wrath of the king abated. On that day King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told him what he was to her. Esther chapter 8, verses 1-17. On that day King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told him what he was to her. The king took off his signet ring which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Then Esther spoke again to the king. She fell at his feet and wept and pleaded with him to avert the evil design of Haman the Agagite, and the plot which he had devised against the Jews. The king held out the golden scepter to Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king. She said, "If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and if the thing seems right before the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see the calamity which will come upon my people? Or how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred?" Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, "Behold, I have given Haman's house to Esther, and him they have hanged on the gallows, because he laid his hand on the Jews. And you may write as you please with regard to the Jews in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring. For an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. The king's secretaries were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and an edict, according to all that Mordecai commanded, was written to the Jews, and to the satraps and the governors and the officials of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces. To every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language, and also to the Jews in their own script and their own language. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by mounted couriers riding on swift horses that were used in the king's service, bred from the royal stud, in which the king granted the Jews who were in every city to gather and defend their lives, to destroy, to slay, and to annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them, with their little ones and women, and to plunder their goods, upon one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province, and published to all peoples, so that the Jews might be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So the couriers, mounted on swift horses, rode out, urged by the king's command, and the decree was issued in the fortress of Susa. And Mordecai went forth from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white, with a great crown of gold, and a mantle of fine linen and purple, while the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. The Jews had light and gladness, joy and honor. And in every province and in every city, wherever the king's command and his decree arrived, there was gladness among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many from the peoples of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews had fallen upon them. Esther chapter 9, verses 1 to 32. In the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day, the king's command and his decree were to be executed. On the day that the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, the opposite occurred, and the Jews overpowered those who hated them. The Jews gathered in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought their hurt, and no one could stand against them, for the fear of them had fallen upon all peoples. All the officials of the provinces and the satraps and the governors and royal agents supported the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai had fallen upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces, for the man Mordecai grew more and more powerful. The Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, destruction, and slaughter, and did as they pleased to those who hated them. In Susa, the capital itself, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men, and they killed Parshandasa, Dalpon, Espasa, Porasa, Adalia, Aridasa, Parmashta, Arisai, Aridai, and Vasasa, the 10 sons of Haman the son of Hamedasa, the Jews' enemy. But they did not lay their hands on the plunder. On that day, the number of those slain in Susa, the capital, was reported to the king. The king said to Queen Esther, "In Susa the capital, the Jews have killed 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition? It shall be granted you. And what further request do you have? It shall be fulfilled." Esther said, "If it please the king, let the Jews in Susa be allowed to do again tomorrow as they did today, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows." So the king commanded this to be done. A decree was issued in Susa, and Haman's 10 sons were hanged. The Jews who were in Susa gathered on the 14th day also, and on the 15th day, and they rested on the 16th day, making it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews who were in the other provinces gathered to defend their lives, got relief from their enemies, and killed 75,000 of those who hated them. But they did not lay their hands on the plunder. This was on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day they rested, and made that a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews who were in Susa gathered on the 13th day and on the 14th, and rested on the 15th day, making that a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages, who live in the open country, make the 14th day of the month of Adar a day of gladness and feasting, a holiday on which they send portions of food to one another. And Mordecai recorded these things, and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, charging them to keep the 14th day of the month of Adar, and also the 15th day of the same, year after year, as the days on which the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month which had been turned for them from sorrow into gladness and from mourning into a holiday. That they should make them days of feasting and gladness, days of sending portions of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews accepted what they had started to do, and what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman the Agagite, the son of Hamedasa, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast Pur, that is, the lot, to crush and destroy them. But when it came before the king, He gave orders in writing that his evil plan, which he had devised against the Jews, should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore these days are called Purim, from the word pur thus, because of all that was written in this letter, and of what they had faced in regard to this matter. And of what had happened to them, the Jews firmly obligated themselves and their descendants, and all who joined them without exception, to observe these 2 days according to what was written and at the time appointed every year, and that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, in every family, in every province, and in every city, and that these days of Purim should never cease from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them cease from their descendants. Then Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail and Mordecai, the Jew, gave full written authority, confirming this second letter about Purim. Letters were sent to all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, words of peace and truth to these days of Purim at the appointed time, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had laid down for them, and as they had prescribed for themselves and for their descendants in connection with their fasts and their lamentations. The command of Esther established these practices of Purim, and it was recorded in writing. Esther chapter 10, verses 1-3. King Ahasuerus imposed tribute on the land and upon the coastlands of the sea. All the acts of his power and authority, indeed the full account of the high honor of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Ahasuerus, and he was great among the Jews and well-pleasing to many of his brethren, for he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to all his people.